A police cruiser screeched to a stop beside the curb,
Sir,
just as
keep
the
your
trunk of
hands
the
where I can
sedan
see 'em.
slammed halfway shut.
Step away from the
"Hey,
vehicle
stop right
slowly.
there!" The shout cut through the quiet evening parking lot. The tall black man standing behind the car froze with one hand still resting on a folded baby stroller. Slowly, he turned around. Officer Daniel Harris stepped out of the cruiser quickly, his hand resting near his radio as his eyes locked onto the man. "Step away from the vehicle," Harris ordered. The man blinked in surprise. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Step away from the vehicle. Now." The man sighed quietly, but did as he was told, lifting his hand slightly as he stepped back from the open trunk. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" he asked calmly. Harris glanced at the stroller sitting in the trunk, then back at the man. "You want to tell me why you're putting a stroller into that car?" The man looked confused. "Because it belongs there." Harris shook his head. "No baby, no diaper bag, just a stroller. That's suspicious?" The man crossed his arms. "So putting something in my car is suspicious now?" Harris stepped closer. "Depends on what it is and where it came from." The man's patience began to thin. "My name is Marcus Ellison," he said firmly, "and I'm trying to go home." Harris raised an eyebrow. "Well, Marcus, before you go anywhere, you're going to answer a few questions." Marcus looked around the parking lot. A couple of people walking out of the grocery store had slowed down. They were watching now. Marcus turned back to the officer. "What kind of questions?" "Where did the stroller come from?" Marcus answered plainly. "A courthouse." Harris frowned. "A courthouse?" "Yes." "And whose stroller is it?" "A grandmother's." "Where's the child?" Marcus sighed. "There is no child." That answer made Harris's suspicion spike even higher. "No child," Harris repeated slowly. Marcus nodded. "No child." Harris folded his arms. "So you're just driving around with a stroller that belongs to someone else and there's no baby?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Yes. That's exactly what's happening." Harris shook his head. "Yeah, that doesn't make sense." Marcus let out a quiet breath. "It makes sense if you listen." Harris ignored that. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Marcus didn't move immediately. Instead, he looked directly at Harris. "Officer, can you tell me what crime you believe I've committed?" Harris's voice hardened. "I didn't say you committed a crime. But you're treating me like I did. I'm investigating suspicious behavior." Marcus almost laughed. "Suspicious behavior?" He pointed at the stroller. "That's suspicious?" Harris took another step forward. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time for identification." Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket. As he pulled out his wallet, the tension in the parking lot continued to grow. Two teenagers near the store entrance were openly recording the scene now. A woman whispered to the man beside her, "What's going on?" "Looks like a police stop." Marcus noticed the phones. He looked back at Harris. "You realize everyone here thinks I'm some kind of criminal right now?" Harris didn't respond. Marcus handed him the ID. Harris took it and glanced down. Then his radio crackled. Another patrol car pulled into the lot. The flashing lights reflected off the parked vehicles. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "You called back up too?" Harris didn't answer. The second officer stepped out of the car and walked over. "What's the situation?" Harris pointed toward the stroller. "Guy loading a stroller into his trunk. No kid. Claims it belongs to someone else." The second officer looked Marcus up and down. "Evening?" Marcus nodded politely. "Apparently not." The officer leaned toward the trunk and examined the stroller. "It's just a stroller," he said. Marcus spread his hands. "Thank you." But Harris still wasn't satisfied. Where exactly did you say you got this? Marcus replied calmly. A courthouse. The second officer frowned. Which courthouse? Marcus answered without hesitation. The family court building downtown. Harris looked skeptical. And what were you doing there? Marcus stared at him for a moment. Working. Harris crossed his arms again. And what kind of work do you do at a courthouse? Marcus tilted his head. Before I answer that, officer, can I ask you something? Harris frowned. What? Marcus gestured toward the growing crowd. Do you see what's happening right now? Harris glanced around. At least 10 people were watching. Several were recording. Marcus continued quietly. You've stopped me in a parking lot. You're questioning me like I stole something. Harris said nothing. Marcus's voice became firmer. But you haven't actually listened to a single thing I've said. Harris looked down at the ID in his hand. He finally read it. His eyes scanned the name, then the title beneath it. He stopped. His entire expression changed. The second officer noticed immediately. What is it? Harris slowly turned the card so the other officer could see it. The officer's eyebrows shot up. Marcus folded his arms. You done reading it? Harris looked up slowly. You're a judge. Marcus nodded calmly. That's correct. The second officer leaned closer. Family court judge? Marcus gave a small nod. Yes. The entire atmosphere in the parking lot shifted instantly. One of the teenagers filming whispered loudly. Did he say judge? Marcus slipped his ID back into his wallet. Well, he said evenly, now that we've clarified that, can I finish putting the stroller in my car? Harris rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Mr. Ellison, I didn't realize. Marcus cut him off. No, you didn't. The second officer tried to smooth things over. Sir, we were just doing our job. Marcus looked at him calmly. I understand that. Then he looked back at Harris. But the way you do your job matters. Harris looked uncomfortable. Marcus walked to the trunk and gently adjusted the stroller. The crowd slowly started whispering among themselves. Marcus closed the trunk softly. Then he turned back toward the officers. You want to know the full story now? He asked. Harris nodded. Yes, sir. Marcus leaned against the car. This stroller belongs to a grandmother who was in my courtroom this morning. The parking lot grew quiet as people listened. Marcus continued. She's raising her grandson alone. Harris listened carefully now. Marcus spoke slowly. Her daughter lost custody today. The words hung heavy. Marcus's voice softened. She forgot the stroller outside the courthouse when she left, Harris asked quietly. So you offered to return it? Marcus nodded. Yes. The second officer shook his head. That's actually really kind of you. Marcus shrugged slightly. Sometimes the smallest gestures matter when someone's life is falling apart. Harris looked down at the ground. Then he spoke quietly. I owe you an apology. Marcus studied his face. For what? For assuming the worst. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the people recording the moment. Officer Harris, he said slowly. Harris looked up. Yes? Marcus spoke calmly. In my courtroom, I see families every day whose lives change because someone made a quick judgment. Harris swallowed. Marcus continued. And tonight? You made one about me. Harris nodded. You're right. Marcus gave a small sigh. But you also stopped to listen, eventually. The tension in the parking lot finally began to ease. Cars continued pulling into the lot. People returned to their shopping. But Harris still felt the weight of the moment. Marcus opened his car door. Before getting inside, he turned back toward Harris. Protecting the community means asking questions. Harris nodded slowly. But it also means treating people with dignity while you ask them. Marcus got into the car. The engine started. As the car slowly pulled out of the parking lot, Harris watched the taillights disappear down the street. The second officer stepped beside him. "Well," he said quietly, "that's going to be a story for the station tomorrow." Harris nodded. "Yeah." He stared down the empty road for a moment. Because sometimes the biggest lesson of the night came from the person you least expected. If this story made you think, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts. Because sometimes a simple moment in a parking lot can reveal a much bigger truth about assumptions. Marcus's car rolled slowly toward the exit of the parking lot. Officer Harris stood still for a moment, watching the taillights disappear down the street. The second officer, Officer Lopez, folded his arms and let out a breath. "Well," Lopez said quietly, "that escalated fast." Harris didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still on the road. "Yeah," he finally muttered. Lopez glanced over at him. "You all right?" Harris shrugged slightly. "I was doing my job." Lopez nodded. "Sure," but he said it in a way that made Harris uncomfortable. "What's that supposed to mean?" Harris asked. Lopez looked back toward the grocery store. "Just saying, sometimes there's a difference between doing the job and how you do the job." Harris didn't reply. The crowd that had gathered in the parking lot was slowly fading, but not completely. Two teenagers were still standing near the entrance. One of them lowered his phone and looked at his friend. "Man, that officer almost arrested a judge." Harris heard it. He pretended not to. Lopez noticed, though. "Welcome to the internet," Lopez said quietly. Harris frowned. "What do you mean?" Lopez pointed subtly. "Phones." Harris turned his head. 3 different people had clearly been recording the whole encounter. One of them was already typing something on their phone. Harris sighed. "Great." Lopez shrugged. "Could be worse." "How?" "Well, you didn't actually arrest him." Harris rubbed his forehead. "That's not the point." Lopez tilted his head. "Then what is?" Harris didn't answer, because the truth was starting to sink in. Marcus Ellison had remained calm the entire time, respectful, patient. Even when Harris had raised his voice, even when the situation started drawing attention. Lopez spoke again. "You know what surprised me?" Harris looked over. "What?" "That he didn't lose his temper." Harris nodded slightly. "Yeah." Lopez smirked. "Most people would have." Harris glanced down at the pavement. "Maybe he's used to dealing with tense situations." Lopez chuckled. "Well, he is a family court judge." Harris looked back toward the empty road. "Still," Lopez leaned against the cruiser. "Still what?" Harris shook his head. "Nothing." But inside his mind, Marcus's words kept echoing. "The way you do your job matters." Lopez pushed himself off the cruiser. "Come on," he said. "Let's finish the shift." Harris nodded and climbed back into the patrol car. The cruiser pulled away from the grocery store and merged onto the main road. For the next 20 minutes, neither officer said much. Just routine patrol, quiet streets, normal radio chatter. But Harris couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head. Finally, Lopez broke the silence. "You ever been inside family court?" he asked. Harris shook his head. "No." Lopez nodded slowly. "My sister went through a custody battle there a few years ago." Harris glanced over. "Yeah?" Lopez nodded again. "Judge Ellison might have actually been the one on that case." Harris looked surprised. "Really?" Lopez shrugged. Could be. What was he like? Lopez thought for a moment. Fair. Harris waited. Lopez continued. He listened to everyone before making a decision. Harris sighed quietly. Guess he gave me the same courtesy tonight. Lopez smirked. Eventually. Harris shot him a look. You're enjoying this too much. Lopez laughed. Maybe a little. The radio crackled suddenly. Unit 24, respond to disturbance on Maple Street. Harris grabbed the radio. Unit 24 responding. The cruiser turned onto the next street and accelerated. Within minutes, they arrived at a small apartment complex. A couple arguing loudly outside, nothing serious, just raised voices. Harris stepped out of the cruiser. Evening, folks, he said calmly. The couple turned toward him. The woman crossed her arms. He won't leave. The man threw his hands up. I live here. Harris held up his hands gently. All right, let's slow down. Lopez stood nearby while Harris spoke to both of them. The situation settled quickly. Just a misunderstanding about keys and access. Within 10 minutes, it was resolved. As Harris walked back toward the cruiser, Lopez spoke quietly. You handled that well. Harris opened the car door. I always do. Lopez grinned. Yeah, but tonight you listened first. Harris paused for a moment. Then he climbed into the cruiser. Another hour passed. The night grew quieter. Just after 10 p.m., Harris parked the cruiser outside the police station. The shift was ending. Both officers stepped out of the car. Inside the station, a few officers were already finishing paperwork. One of them looked up as Harris walked in. Hey, Harris. Harris nodded. What's up? The officer held up his phone. You're trending? Harris frowned. What? The officer turned the screen toward him. A video was playing. The parking lot, the stroller. Harris's voice clearly heard saying, "Step away from the vehicle." Harris exhaled slowly. Well, that didn't take long. Another officer chuckled. Welcome to social media. Lopez leaned over Harris's shoulder. Let me see. The video continued playing. Marcus calmly answering questions, the crowd whispering. Then the moment Harris read the ID, Lopez nodded. At least the ending looked decent. Harris crossed his arms. Still. Lopez looked at him. You worried about the department? Harris shook his head. No. Then what? Harris looked at the screen again. Marcus's calm voice played through the speaker. The way you do your job matters. Harris muttered quietly. He was right. Lopez raised an eyebrow. You admitting that? Harris smirked slightly. Don't get used to it. The room laughed. But Harris still felt the weight of the encounter. Not because of the video. Not because of the crowd. Because Marcus Ellison had looked him straight in the eye and challenged him to do better. And that challenge stuck with him. Lopez clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, he said. Let's go home. As Harris stepped outside the station into the cool night air, he didn't realize something unexpected was about to happen. Because the next time he would see Marcus Ellison wouldn't be in a parking lot. It would be inside a courtroom. And the conversation they were about to have there would change everything Harris thought he knew about justice. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below, because the next part of this story is where things get even more interesting. The courthouse doors swung open as Officer Daniel Harris stepped inside the next morning. He hadn't planned on being there. In fact, the last place he expected to be after the previous night was a courthouse. But the department had assigned him to attend a community justice meeting that afternoon. Officers and judges met occasionally to talk about cases involving families, youth programs, and neighborhood safety. Normally, Harris didn't mind the meetings. But today felt different, because when he looked at the schedule posted near the entrance, one name immediately stood out: Judge Marcus Ellison. Harris let out a quiet breath. Of course, he muttered to himself. Inside the courtroom lobby, people moved through security, lawyers hurried down hallways, and families sat quietly on wooden benches waiting for hearings. It was a very different atmosphere from the parking lot the night before. Lopez had walked in with him, but nudged his elbow. "You all right?" Lopez asked quietly. Harris nodded. "Yeah," Lopez smirked. "You sure?" Harris looked at the courtroom doors. "Let's just get through the meeting." They entered the courtroom and took seats toward the back. About 20 people sat scattered around the room: social workers, officers, a few attorneys. At the front sat the judge's bench. Empty. Harris leaned back in his chair. Then the side door opened, and Marcus Ellison walked in. The room immediately went quiet. Marcus wore a black robe now, his posture confident as he stepped toward the bench. He placed a folder down and looked out across the room. For a brief moment, his eyes met Harris's. Recognition flashed instantly. Marcus paused, just for half a second. Then he continued walking and took his seat. "Good afternoon," Marcus said calmly. The room responded. "Good afternoon, Your Honor." Harris shifted in his seat. Lopez leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Well, this is awkward." Harris shot him a look. "Be quiet." Marcus began speaking. "Today's meeting is about improving cooperation between law enforcement and family court services." His voice was steady and professional. But Harris noticed something. Marcus glanced toward the back of the room again, directly at him. Not angry, not mocking, just observant. Marcus continued speaking. "Every day in this courtroom, we deal with families in crisis." He looked at the officers sitting in the room. Children removed from unsafe homes. Parents trying to rebuild their lives. Guardians fighting to protect their grandchildren. His voice softened slightly. These situations require careful judgment. Harris listened. Marcus rested his hands on the bench. "And they require patience." Harris felt the weight of that word. Patience. Marcus continued. "Because when people are under pressure, emotions run high." A social worker raised her hand. "Your Honor, what can law enforcement do differently when responding to family-related calls?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Good question." He looked around the room. "First, listen." Then he added quietly, "Second, avoid assumptions." Harris knew those words were directed at him, not publicly, but personally. Marcus continued. "Many of the people we encounter are already in the worst moments of their lives." The room remained silent as he spoke. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And sometimes a single decision from an officer or a judge can completely change a child's future." Harris slowly folded his arms. Marcus finished the point and turned a page in his notes. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. Different topics, community programs, juvenile cases. But Harris barely spoke. He kept thinking about the parking lot, about how quickly things had escalated, about how easily Marcus could have reacted differently. Finally, the meeting ended. People began gathering their belongings. Chairs slid across the floor. Conversations started up again. Marcus stood from the bench and walked down the side steps toward the exit. Harris noticed immediately. Lopez nudged him. "You going to say something?" Harris hesitated. Then he stood. Marcus was just reaching the hallway when Harris caught up. "Judge Ellison?" Marcus turned. His expression remained calm. "Officer Harris?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harris said it. I wanted to apologize again. Marcus studied him. For last night? Harris nodded. Yes. Marcus folded his hands calmly. Apology accepted. Harris exhaled quietly. But I also wanted to say something else. Marcus waited. Harris spoke honestly. You were right. Marcus tilted his head slightly. About what? Harris looked him directly in the eye. The way we do the job matters. Marcus's expression softened slightly. That's true. Harris continued. I let suspicion turn into assumption. Marcus nodded slowly. That happens more often than people realize. Harris hesitated. Still doesn't make it right. Marcus considered that. No, it doesn't. The hallway remained quiet around them. Then Marcus spoke again. But I also understand something. Harris raised an eyebrow. What's that? Marcus smiled faintly. You're human. Harris didn't expect that answer. Marcus continued. Every judge makes mistakes. Every officer does too. The important part is what happens after. Harris listened closely. Marcus gestured lightly toward the courtroom. Justice isn't about pretending mistakes never happen. It's about learning from them. Harris nodded slowly. I appreciate that. Marcus adjusted the folder in his hand. And for what it's worth, Harris looked up. You did something important last night. What's that? Marcus answered simply. You listened. Harris thought about that for a moment. Then Marcus added something unexpected. Would you like to see something? Harris frowned slightly. What? Marcus nodded toward the courtroom doors. Come with me. Harris followed him back inside. Marcus led him to the judge's bench, then pointed toward the empty chairs in front. Every one of those seats is usually filled with families. Harris looked out across the courtroom. Marcus continued. Parents fighting to keep their children. Grandparents begging for custody. Teenagers trying to stay out of foster care. Harris stayed silent. Marcus looked at him. And every person who walks through that door hopes the person sitting in this chair will understand their situation before making a decision. Harris nodded slowly. Marcus stepped back. Just like people hope the officer standing in front of them will do the same. The message was clear. Harris gave a small, respectful nod. I won't forget that. Marcus smiled faintly. Good. Then he extended his hand. Harris shook it. As Harris left the courthouse, Lopez caught up with him outside. Well? Lopez asked. Harris smiled slightly. He's a good man. Lopez nodded. Yeah, figured that out yesterday. Harris looked up at the courthouse building. You know something? What? Harris said quietly. Last night I thought I was protecting the community. Lopez raised an eyebrow. And now? Harris looked back at the doors Marcus had walked through. Now I realize there are a lot of ways to do that. Lopez grinned. Welcome to growth, partner. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful moments like this, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts. Because sometimes the biggest lessons about justice don't happen in courtrooms. They happen in parking lots.